One of the most feared, most violently obsessed fighters in this entire story spends most of his screen time despising weakness, mocking anyone too fragile to survive, treating compassion like something for people who don't matter. Audiences call him a monster. By every visible measure, he is one. And then, dying, in his final moments, the mask finally cracks. Underneath it is a boy who once stole food to keep his sick father alive. A boy who fell in love for the first time and thought his life was finally beginning. A boy who lost everything in a single night and never found his way back. His name, before any of it, was Hakuji. You know him now as Akaza. This isn't a story about a virtue to imitate. It's about how much a good person can lose before there's nothing left of them to save. Hakuji grew up poor, the only person capable of holding his family together. His father was sick, too sick to work, entirely dependent on a son who was still practically a child. No safety net, no community waiting to catch them. Just a boy and a dying man running out of options. So Hakuji started stealing food, money, whatever kept his father alive one more day. It wasn't a choice between right and easy. It was a choice between two versions of wrong. Watch his father die of something treatable or break the law to prevent it. He gets caught. And his father, sick, weak, but carrying a rigid sense of honor poverty never stripped away, is devastated not by the theft itself, but by what it reveals about the life he's given his son. Rather than live with that shame, he takes his own life, leaving a note asking Hakuji to become someone honest, someone better. Sit with that. Hakuji stole to save his father. His father's response to being saved that way was to end his life anyway, leaving his son not just orphaned, but carrying the crushing knowledge that his own effort to help had somehow triggered the very loss he was trying to prevent. That's not ordinary grief. That's grief with guilt fused directly into it, at an age when most people haven't developed anywhere near the tools required to survive something like that intact. Alone with nothing left, Hakuji is taken in by a martial arts teacher named Keizo, who sees something worth saving in the wreckage. Keizo teaches him more than fighting. He gives him structure, purpose, the first real stability Hakuji has ever known. Hakuji trains obsessively, not out of desperation this time, but because for once, effort is actually rewarded with growth instead of punished by circumstance. He becomes exceptional, talented enough to be considered the dojo's future successor, respected by everyone around him. And he falls in love. Koyuki, Keizo's daughter, frail and often sick herself, becomes the center of a life he never thought he'd get to have. A family that chose him, a future he could actually imagine, a reason to become strong that wasn't rooted in survival anymore, but in wanting to protect something precious instead. For a brief stretch of this story, everything is improbably good. It's worth letting that sit fully, because it's about to be taken away. It's not power he's found here, or fame, or anything extraordinary. It's a family, a purpose, someone to love and be loved by in return. The same modest universal things almost anyone would name if asked what they actually wanted out of life. A rival dojo, resentful of Keizo's growing reputation, moves against them out of pure jealousy, poisoning Koyuki, killing Keizo while Hakuji is away. He comes home to find the two people who gave his life meaning dying in front of him. Murdered not out of necessity. Out of envy over reputation, Koyuki, in her final moments, asks him one thing: don't seek revenge, let this go. Live the honest life his own father once asked of him. This is the second time in Hakuji's life that someone he loved dies while asking him, with their last breath, to become someone gentler because of it. The first time, he didn't get the chance. His father's death came without warning. This time, he hears the request directly, while she's dying in his arms. At the exact moment restraint is hardest to access. Hakuji doesn't honor it. Consumed by grief too large for anyone to survive intact, he hunts down every member of the rival dojo and kills them. Not in self-defense, but completely, methodically, far beyond anything necessary. This is the moment the entire tragedy turns on, not the poverty, not even the murders themselves. This choice, to become the exact thing the person he loved most begged him, with her last breath, not to become. Grief that intense doesn't leave much room for the version of yourself that makes good decisions. Most people never have to find out what they're capable of under that kind of pressure. But Hakuji finds out. And what he finds is something he can never undo. Other characters in stories like this one lose just as much, sometimes more, and still find a way to hold their pain without letting it dictate who they become afterward. Hakuji doesn't get there, not because he loved less, but because the speed and violence of what happened to him left no space to process anything before he had to act. Broken, likely dying from his own wounds, Hakuji is found by Muzan, who offers him what he offers everyone shattered enough to say yes: strength beyond human limits, an end to the pain currently consuming him. Hakuji accepts, and as part of that transformation, his human memories are stripped away almost entirely. His father, Keizo, Koyuki, gone somewhere he can no longer consciously reach. He doesn't become a demon because he's evil. He becomes one because he's a broken young man in unbearable pain, offered an escape by someone who specializes in finding exactly that kind of person at exactly that kind of moment. Muzan doesn't need to corrupt good people. He just needs to find people who've already been shattered by the world and offer them numbness dressed up as power. As Akaza, the values Keizo gave him don't disappear. They curdle into something unrecognizable. The discipline that once made him a devoted student becomes an obsession with pure physical strength. The respect he once had for his teacher becomes contempt for anyone weaker than himself. And yet, buried underneath all of it, something strange survives. Akaza refuses to prey on children and shows an unexplained aversion to hurting the elderly and the sick, exactly the kind of person his own father once was. He doesn't consciously remember why. The memory is gone. But some fragment of who Hakuji was still shapes him anyway. Even total transformation, even the complete erasure of memory couldn't fully overwrite the one thing that mattered most to him before everything else was taken away. In his final battle, dying after 100 years of chasing strength as a replacement for everything he lost, the memories finally surface, all at once: his father, Keizo, Koyuki, and the request he never honored. A century of running from the exact grief that made him vulnerable enough to accept Muzan's offer in the first place. In that last moment, he isn't the feared demon anymore. He's just Hakuji again, dying as himself, finally remembering exactly what he spent a century trying never to remember at all. The memories don't arrive in time to change anything. They arrive only at the end, useless for redemption, only good enough to let him die, knowing exactly what he lost and what it cost him to try to outrun it. 100 years spent as someone who despised weakness, and the only thing that finally breaks through is the weakest, most human moment imaginable: a dying man remembering the people he loved. This isn't a story that ends with a lesson about becoming more like Akaza. It's the opposite. A warning about what grief, left completely unprocessed, is capable of doing to someone who was never evil to begin with. Think about people you know, maybe yourself, who've experienced a loss big enough that something in them never quite recovered. Not because they're broken people at their core, but because grief that size, left with nowhere real to go, doesn't just sit quietly. It looks for an outlet, sometimes obsession, sometimes numbness. Sometimes exactly the kind of contempt for vulnerability Akaza built his whole identity around. Someone once loved fiercely, deciding love itself was the thing that hurt him, and that strength meant never being that exposed again. Koyuki's last request wasn't really about protecting the people who killed her father. It was about protecting Hakuji from becoming someone who'd have to live with what revenge cost him. He didn't listen. The story spends 100 years showing you exactly what that cost actually was. Akaza isn't a monster because he was born one. He's a monster because he was a devastated young man who never got the chance to grieve his losses instead of letting them calcify into something that consumed everything good that was still left inside him. You don't need to have lost anything close to what Hakuji lost for this to apply to you. Everyone carries something, a loss, a betrayal, a grief that never got properly finished, quietly shaping decisions you don't fully understand the origin of anymore. Maybe the real question this story leaves you with isn't about Akaza at all. It's about whoever in your life is currently standing where Hakuji once stood, freshly devastated, still capable of choosing differently, and whether there's anything you can do, while it still matters, to make sure grief like that doesn't have to finish the job alone, because the thing that might have actually saved him wasn't strength. It was the fact that once, in his worst moment, someone showed up. Keizo took him in when he had nothing left, and for a while that was enough to rebuild an entire life out of the wreckage. What finally broke him wasn't weakness. It was a second devastating loss arriving with no one left to catch him the way Keizo once had.